Rome fought in a world where arrows were a standard part of warfare, yet the Roman citizen army rarely made archery a core skill. That wasn't because they didn't understand bows. It was a deliberate choice shaped by how the legion was designed to fight, what Roman culture rewarded, and what could be trained and supplied efficiently across a massive empire. Instead of building a homegrown archer tradition, Rome leaned on javelins, siege artillery, and foreign auxiliary archers, while keeping the legions focused on disciplined close combat. Number 1. What the legion was built to do. Roman battlefield thinking was shaped around one main idea. Heavy infantry wins when it can control space and force a decision up close. That sounds simple, but it explains a lot. The standard legionary was equipped for pressure, not for distance. The scutum was a large curved shield designed to cover the body and overlap with the man next to you. The gladius was short, meant for thrusting in tight conditions where swinging a longer sword would be awkward and slow. The pilum, a heavy javelin, was not meant to turn the legion into a missile army. It was meant to disrupt the enemy just before contact. 1 or 2 throws, then the line moves in and finishes the job. Roman doctrine treated missiles as a tool to shape the moment of impact, not as the main method of killing. That choice affected everything: training, formations, command style, and even what Roman officers expected a proper battle to look like. Roman commanders wanted a fight where their unit cohesion mattered more than individual skill. If the legion stayed organized, it could push, rotate, reinforce weak points, and keep pressure on the enemy line. If the enemy line broke, Rome had a clear path to victory. Archery encourages a different kind of battle. It tends to reward time, spacing, and sustained fire. It works best when you can keep the enemy at a distance, wear them down, and force mistakes over minutes or hours. Heavy infantry doctrine aims for the opposite. Shorten the timeline, remove uncertainty, and bring the fight into a range where discipline and armor make the difference. This is why the Romans didn't treat archers as missing tech. They treated them as a specialized tool that did not belong at the center of the system. The Roman center was the citizen infantry block. Everything else was organized around supporting that block or extending its reach in limited ways. You can see that in Roman warfare across the Republic and much of the Empire. A strong infantry corps, missile troops on the edges, cavalry mostly for scouting, pursuit and protecting flanks, and engineers making sure the army could move, camp, and siege in a predictable way. So when people ask, why did Romans refuse to use archers? A more accurate starting point is, Rome refused to make archery the defining skill of the citizen soldier. They built an army where the main job was to advance under control and settle the fight at close range. In that context, archers weren't ignored, but they were rarely allowed to shape the identity of Roman warfare. Number 2. Standardization beats specialist skills. Rome's advantage was not a single weapon. It was the ability to produce consistent soldiers and consistent battlefield behavior. That takes a specific kind of training. Legionaries drilled marching, formation keeping, and simple, repeatable combat actions. Roman training emphasized movements that worked under stress and in tight ranks. Hold the line, keep the shield in position, thrust when ordered, and avoid actions that break cohesion. The goal was not individual style. The goal was reliability. Archery is harder to standardize at scale, especially if you start late. A strong bow demands upper body strength that builds over time. Good shooting also depends on technique. Drawing smoothly, anchoring consistently, judging distance, and releasing cleanly. A unit of archers is only as effective as its average skill level, because inaccurate volleys waste ammunition and create little pressure. That is a problem for an army that wants predictable results from large numbers of recruits. The Roman solution was to standardize what could be standardized: heavy infantry equipment and heavy infantry drills. The pilum is a good example. It gave Rome a ranged effect without needing a lifetime of practice. A soldier could be trained to throw a heavy javelin effectively far faster than he could be trained into a high-level archer. The pilum also fit the sequence Rome wanted: throw, close, fight. This is also where the Roman approach to discipline matters. Roman formations depended on units keeping their place. A line that drifts or opens gaps becomes vulnerable, especially to cavalry and to sudden pressure on the flanks. Archers, by nature, need room and flexibility. They are often placed in looser order so they can shoot, move, and avoid being pinned. That looseness clashes with the Roman preference for tight control at the center. There is also an economic angle. Rome invested in what every legionary needed to carry and use. When your main force is infantry, you put resources into shields, armor, helmets, swords, javelins, and the support system that keeps those things repaired and supplied. You build training grounds, drill routines, and officer methods around that. Creating a broad citizen archery arm would require different training infrastructure, different equipment pipelines, and different expectations about how battles are fought. That kind of shift is possible, but it is not quick and it is not free. So Rome doubled down on what it could scale. Infantry cohesion, standardized kit, and simple range support that did not require turning the average citizen recruit into a specialist marksman. From Rome's perspective, the system was working. They had fewer incentives to rebuild their military identity around a weapon that demanded a different training culture. Number 3. Formations leave little room for bows. Even if Rome had wanted large numbers of citizen archers, the physical reality of Roman formations made it difficult to integrate bows into the main fight. Drawing a bow requires space. In tight ranks, space is exactly what you do not have. A Roman infantry line was designed to compress, not to spread out. Soldiers needed to keep shields aligned, maintain forward pressure, and avoid the kind of gaps an enemy could exploit. Now consider visibility. Roman shields were tall, and during missile exchanges, the front ranks could raise shields high. In some situations, Romans also used the testudo, the tortoise formation, where shields cover the front and top to protect against missiles. That is excellent for surviving arrow fire coming at you. It is not compatible with firing arrows out from inside the formation. You cannot shoot effectively through a wall of shields, and you cannot aim well when your line of sight is blocked by your own protection. Command and control also matters. Ancient armies had no radios, no live maps, and no quick way to coordinate complex timing between separate arms. Roman commanders preferred battle plans that could work with simple signals and predictable movement. A core infantry advance is easier to manage than a two-layer system where archers must fire at the right angles, avoid hitting friendly troops, withdraw at the right moment, and relocate while the main line is moving. It can be done, and other armies did it, but it demands a strong combined arms culture and practiced coordination. Rome's combined arms culture existed, but for much of its history, it was built around infantry first, with other arms supporting rather than leading. There is also the issue of protection. Archers are vulnerable if they are caught. If you place archers in front, they need enough time and space to withdraw before the enemy closes. If you place them behind, their fields of fire can be limited, and their arrows can be obstructed by the front ranks. If you place them on the flanks, they need protection against cavalry and fast-moving infantry. That typically means pairing them with cavalry or light troops, which adds more moving parts. Rome did use missile troops in these ways, especially through auxiliaries. But the key point is that the Roman center was not designed to make room for archers. It was designed to keep shape and keep pressure. In that design, the bow works better as an external attachment, on the flanks, in skirmish lines, on walls during sieges, rather than as a core tool of the legion's main shock action. Number 4. Status, virtue, and the citizen soldier. Military choices are never only technical. They also reflect what a society respects. In Rome, the citizen soldier ideal was tied to close combat, discipline, and visible risk. Roman culture valued virtues, courage, and manly excellence, and it was often framed in terms of standing firm and facing danger directly. That attitude influenced which roles were considered prestigious. In many ancient societies, missile troops were treated as necessary, but lower status. Rome inherited and reinforced that pattern. Earlier Roman military organization was connected to property and class. Those who could afford heavier equipment stood in the main line. Those who could not were used in lighter roles. Over time the army professionalized, but older assumptions about prestige did not disappear. The infantryman in armor remained the symbolic real soldier. while many missile roles were treated as support. Greek cultural influence also played a role. Romans absorbed Greek literature and education, and in many Greek narratives, archery is associated with trickery, distance, or an avoidance of direct contest. That does not mean Greeks never used archers, many did, but it shaped the cultural language of what was admired. Romans borrowed that language, and it helped keep archery outside the center of Roman identity. There is also a political incentive. In Rome, military service and reputation could matter for public standing. A citizen who served in the heavy infantry could present himself as someone who took the hard role, endured danger, and proved reliability under pressure. That reputation was easier to claim when your role was clearly visible and culturally praised. Archery, even when effective, did not automatically carry the same image within Roman elite values. This is one reason Rome did not develop a strong native archery tradition over generations. In cultures where archery becomes central, children often start young, and the skill becomes part of daily life. In Rome, respectable upbringing focused more on the skills expected of the citizen elite: physical toughness, riding, weapons suited to close combat, and leadership behaviors. If a society does not reward a skill with status, fewer families invest in it, fewer young men practice it early, and the country ends up relying on outsiders when it needs that skill. So the refusal was not a formal ban. It was a long cultural choice. The bow was useful, but it was not the weapon through which Roman citizens expected to earn honor. That cultural filter shaped recruitment, training, and the way commanders built their forces. Number 5. Materials, manufacturing, and ammunition. There is a practical industrial side to this topic that is easy to miss. Bows are not all the same. In the Mediterranean world, some of the most effective military bows were composite bows, built from layered materials like wood, horn, and sinew, bonded with specialized glues. These bows could store more energy than a simple self-bow of the same size, making them powerful and efficient, especially for mounted archers who needed shorter bows. The challenge is that composite bows require specialized craftsmanship and time. They are sensitive to moisture and heat. They need careful curing and maintenance. That works well in cultures with long archery traditions and established craft networks. It is harder to create quickly as a mass program if your military industry is already optimized for different equipment. Rome's military production excelled at standardized metalwork and leatherwork for infantry. Rome could produce large numbers of helmets, armor components, swords, and javelins to consistent patterns, especially once imperial systems matured. That does not automatically translate into the kind of bow-making tradition found in regions where composite bowcraft was deeply rooted. Rome could buy bows, capture bows, and hire bowyers, but building a wide domestic base of expert bow manufacture is a long project. Then comes ammunition. Archery is logistics heavy. An archer's value comes from sustained shooting, and sustained shooting consumes arrows fast. That means constant resupply. Shafts, heads, feathers, glue, spare strings, and repair tools. An infantryman with pillar throws a limited number and then relies on sword and shield. A large archer arm turns arrow supply into a central planning issue in every campaign. Rome could manage complex logistics, but it preferred to focus that logistics power on what kept the legions effective: food, tools, engineering material, siege equipment, and standardized infantry gear. A Roman army on the march also carried the means to fortify itself and conduct siege operations. That created a heavy and carefully balanced load system. Adding large numbers of archers would not just add bows and arrows, it would add a continuing supply requirement that competes for transport and planning capacity. This does not mean archers were too hard for Rome. It means that, given Rome's established strengths, it was often more efficient to obtain archery as a specialized capability from regions that already had the craft, the training, and the cultural habit. That is exactly what Rome did through auxiliary recruitment. Number 6. Rome's preferred solution: auxiliaries and specialists. When the Roman state needed skills outside the heavy infantry corps, it often chose to recruit them rather than reinvent them. This is where auxiliaries become central to the story. Auxiliaries were non-citizen troops raised from across the empire and beyond it, organized into regular units. They provided capabilities the legions did not emphasize: archers, slingers, light infantry, scouts, and many forms of cavalry. Archers were among the most important of these specialized arms. Certain regions had long-standing reputations for missile skills. Cretan archers were famous in the wider Mediterranean world. In the eastern provinces, archery traditions were strong, and Roman armies could recruit trained bowmen who were already comfortable with the weapons common in that region. North African recruitment also contributed light troops and cavalry, often used for mobility and skirmishing roles that complemented archery. This system let Rome keep the legion's identity intact while still fielding effective missile troops. On the battlefield, archers could screen advances, protect flanks, pressure enemy skirmishers, and support sieges. They could also provide a counter to enemy archery in frontier wars, especially in the east where ranged combat was common. But there were trade-offs. Auxiliary service terms were long, and auxiliaries often served far from home. Citizenship, when offered, came later rather than up front. This meant the empire's missile power was frequently in the hands of men who were not Roman citizens at the start of their service. Rome managed that through pay, discipline, unit pride, and the benefits of service, but it still created a separation between citizen legionary and specialist support. That separation reinforced the cultural pattern. Archery remained useful, even essential, but it was not the prestige core of Roman military identity. Rome relied on archery as an instrument, not as a symbol. In many periods, that arrangement worked well. Roman commanders could combine legionary shock power with auxiliary flexibility. The key is that Rome treated archers as a tool added to the system, not as the system itself. Number 7. When the limits became visible. Rome's infantry-first design worked best when Rome could force the terms of battle. Terrain that allowed formation, an enemy that could be pinned, and a campaign plan that led to a decisive engagement or a siege. Problems appeared when Rome faced enemies who could deny close combat and keep pressure from range. The eastern frontier is the clearest example. Against Parthian and later Persian forces, Rome faced skilled archers, including mounted archers, who could strike, withdraw, and repeat without committing to a direct collision with heavy infantry. In battles like Carrhae in 53 BCE, Roman forces struggled to bring their strengths to bear. Roman infantry could defend itself with shields and discipline, but it could not easily punish an opponent that refused to close. In that kind of fight, endurance, mobility, and ranged pressure become decisive. This is not a claim that Roman armies never adapted. They did. Roman commanders used more auxiliary archers, improved cavalry support, and leaned heavily on fortifications, roads, and strongpoints to control territory. Rome also used artillery and siege engineering as a way to project force at distance in controlled settings. In many campaigns, Rome avoided giving mobile archery forces the open field conditions they wanted. Instead, Rome tried to anchor operations around fortified camps, supply lines, and cities, where engineering and discipline could limit the enemy's freedom to maneuver. But the repeated friction is still important. Rome's core training and prestige culture did not naturally produce large numbers of citizen archers, and that made Rome dependent on recruitment patterns and frontier manpower. When Rome had strong access to auxiliary archers and adequate cavalry coordination, it could handle ranged threats better. When those elements were weaker, the infantry corps could be forced into a defensive posture that did not create easy victory. This is also where the Roman emphasis on the pilum shows its limits. The pilum is effective at short to medium distance right before contact. It is not a long-range harassment weapon. If the enemy stays beyond pilum range and keeps firing, the pilum does not solve the problem. Rome needed either its own sustained ranged capability or a way to force the enemy to come close. In many cases, Rome chose the second option through marching discipline, fortifications, and political pressure. But on some frontiers that was difficult to achieve consistently. So the visibility of the archer gap rises sharply in wars where mobility and distance control matter more than heavy shock at the decisive moment. Number 8. The late empire and the shift toward mixed warfare. As the empire matured, the strategic situation changed. Earlier periods often rewarded expansion, offensive campaigns, and the capture of key cities. Later periods increasingly demanded defense, rapid response, and constant pressure along long borders. That environment tends to favor mobility, scouting, cavalry, and sustained missile capability. Over the 3rd and 4th centuries CE, Roman forces gradually moved toward more mixed structures. Archers became more common as regular units, including sagittary formations, and mounted archery appears more frequently in frontier contexts. Recruitment increasingly drew from regions where archery and cavalry traditions were already strong. This was practical. It is faster to recruit trained archers than to create a new culture of citizen archery from scratch. At the same time, the Roman heavy infantry model did not simply vanish. Infantry remained central, but it operated within a broader toolkit. Border troops held fortified lines and watchposts. Mobile field armies moved to meet threats. Cavalry took on greater importance for pursuit, screening, and countering raids. In the East, where archery traditions were deep and enemies often used powerful bow systems, Roman military organization naturally leaned into missile capability more heavily than it had in earlier Italian-centered eras. This shift also changed the social meaning of soldiering. As more troops came from frontier regions and allied peoples, the older citizen prestige model mattered less inside the army's daily reality. The weapon itself did not change. What changed was what the state needed and who the state relied on. Archery became harder to treat as an outsider skill when large parts of the army were drawn from places where the bow was normal military practice. The key point for understanding the original question is this: Rome's earlier refusal was not a lack of awareness. It was a choice rooted in a successful infantry system, a cultural preference for close combat prestige, and a practical reliance on recruited specialists for missile roles. When strategic conditions and manpower patterns shifted, Rome expanded the role of archers and other missile troops accordingly, not as a sudden revelation, but as a response to changing military problems and the realities of frontier warfare.